How's it going, everyone, and welcome to No Fun Allowed. And today I wanted to give my final thoughts on Curse of Strahd. This amazing module has so much going on for it, and I just wanted to go ahead and talk about some of the amazing things there. Of course, there's going to be a ton of spoilers, so players don't watch this, but DMs don't want that added insight. Go ahead and stick around because there is a lot to cover. Woo-wee! So that was 50 some odd videos on Curse of Strahd. There is so much going on with it. So many different chapters. In fact, I'm going to pull up some of the chapters right now. There is just so much going on, and quite frankly, it's amazing how this thing started off with just the village, and then there was a little camp, and then there was the castle, and then they expanded it out to being this after all these years later. Was that expansion well worth it? I certainly believe so. The land of Barovia is absolutely fantastic. The people therein are great. The quests that you get to explore around and do are fantastic. And this is a complete package of a campaign. There is just, oh my goodness. It's very interesting. Curse of Strahd is unlike any other of the modules in that it is a sandbox, but it's not a world scoping massive sandbox. It's a very small sandbox, very intimate. You get to know all the characters they're in, you get to know all the names and locations. You're not going to be moving too far. In fact, realistically, a character can move from one side of the map to the other relatively quickly. The thing that makes this campaign great is, of course, just all of the NPCs in particular. You get so many named characters that are doing so many different things, and of course, the namesake of the campaign, Strahd himself. Strahd is a villain like no other. Strahd is timeless in that he is able to basically just be in the characters' faces the whole time and not be overbearing. You can have a villain in this campaign that is all in the characters' faces, and it works. I feel like with a lot of campaigns, you can't have the villain interact with the party that much or ever because it'll just be a one and done scenario. Either the villain wants to kill them or, the characters want to kill the villain. Regardless, in the beginning here, Strahd's not killable. There's no way. Your party's way too weak. But if you have Strahd show up, it makes sense that he doesn't want to beat them up because that's not fun for him. He doesn't have grandiose goals to take over the world or activate this magical item. No. Strahd is just chilling and he's bored. And he's using your party to alleviate that boredom. I think when it comes to this book, in particular this adventure, I think what makes a lot of DMs come back to it is the fact that even though it is so intimately small, this location, there's only 3 settlements that are actively used, and, there's only that one big bad castle full of enemies. The thing is the randomness to it is the fact that I could bring in 3 different parties, and even though I bring them through the exact same way, it's going to be so incredibly different. People are going to approach quests differently. People are going to get different Tarot card readings. People are going to have different ideas on what they want out of the campaign in regards of, do they just want to get out of Barovia? Or heck, maybe some people end up staying here because they get tied to the Dark Powers, or they want to take over, or do whatever. There is a reason why Curse of Strahd has the biggest fan base out of all the adventure modules. It is because of just all these factors all working together. It all comes together so incredibly well. After scouring through all the pages of this module, after having both played in this module and having ran this adventure multiple times, I can tell you, I definitely know this a little bit. The thing is even though I did read this thing cover to cover for the series that I did, there's still probably things that I'm totally overlooking in the sense of, oh, I just totally forgot about it, or, oh, I didn't connect these 2 pieces together. But of course, that I guarantee you if you ask anybody in the Discord, the Reddit, wherever, people are going to be able to tell you what's up. I can tell you, though, that there is just so much going on that you don't need to connect everything because you can have a perfectly fun, fine, and fair adventure without having to go to every single one of these places. You don't need to use all 15 of those chapters. You don't need to explore all of Castle Ravenloft. You really don't. There's already so much here. You don't need to use it all. For as much as I'm talking about all the strengths of this module, it has its weaknesses too, right? Not everything's perfect. There's definitely some things that are not going to be suited well for every single audience. There is going to be some things that are pretty cringe in a sense. There's going to be some things that don't make sense for a lot of people. And there's also some mechanical implications around the lands of Barovia as well, which are absolutely ridiculous. Per example being that your players could theoretically stumble across a place that they're way too over-leveled for, and they just wipe everything, and it's boring because they're just god amongst peasants. And then at the same time, there's also scenarios where your players can show up to a place and they're way too under-leveled, and they get the snot beat out of them. If you don't put up these guiding barriers, or if you don't actually change up the locations, that can definitely happen. It really comes down to the information that you feed to them. It comes down to, exactly what they're trying to get out of it. And it also comes down to how cordial they are. A perfect example being Argynvoshtrel. Your players could walk up, and if they think that they're the coolest people around, that they can get into any fight and always win, then boom, a level 4 or level 5 party gets into a fight with a whole bunch of revenants, and then they're going to get smoked. It just happens, right? Simple things like that. You need to make it perfectly clear that if you are running a type of game where PCs die, then hey, bets off, don't do dumb things and you won't die. Easy as that. I think the challenge of Curse of Strahd in particular really comes down to the kind of game that you're running. Because if you're running this module with a sense that everyone's got capes and they're superheroes, then you're definitely going to tone some things down. But if you're running a game where death is around every corner if they're dumb, then you probably don't have to change too much. And also very important is the fact that there's a lot of the implications of what happens if you deal with the darkness. What happens if you introduce a whole bunch of good people into a land filled with dread and they have to do something bad in order to get things accomplished. A perfect example of that being Vallaki. Vallaki is a hotbed of political discourse, and your players right from the get-go walk in and see that there's a tyrannical dictator that's running everything and is being totally mean. But guess what? If they depose him, then they put someone else evil in charge. It can definitely be a lesser of evil scenarios. Your players don't know what the heck to do, and maybe the good people are going to try and always try to get the best outcome, but I don't think that there should always be a best outcome. For the Vallaki situation in particular, I think that there should always be something bad going on because it just reflects what's going on in the world. These people have miserable lives. A lot of these people are soulless. A lot of these people just don't care, and the ones that do care are just so mean that it's sort of a sad approach, really. I think of all the important stories to tell throughout this module, though, I believe the important one to show off is Strahd's whole story and Irina's, or Tatiana's. If your players just come to this land and it's always Strahd just belittling and berating them, and then they get into one epic fight at the very end, yeah, that's fine, but I promise you there's a lot better story to tell if your players actually figure out over the course of time who Strahd was before he became a vampire and the things he's done since he's become a vampire, because that's going to supercharge all of their motivations to finally beat him up. At the same time, if your players get straddled with Irina and they think that Irina is just some VIP mission where they have to carry this person around, that's going to suck. I know a lot of people don't like those kinds of missions because we played them all in video games and it always sucks. But I think there is just a great way to spin it in this, whether it be Irina stands off on her own or one of your characters is the Irina character, whatever the case may be. Expanding upon Tatiana's past, Irina, the person that she is, or whoever is the filler here. Expanding upon those is certainly going to go a long way. I've talked to several people about this module because there's a lot to cover with it. And one of the recommendations is that the PCs are actually people from the lands of Barovia. That is certainly a way to include them into the story no matter what. You have the Father Donovich character, you have the Doru character, you have the Ismar character, you have the Irina character. You can have all these characters and it makes sense and it fits into the world. But at the same time, if it is one of those scenarios where you're finally just rising up after all these years, then you're going to have to explain that away. And if anybody dies, then you got to explain that as well. But if you go with the approach of, hey, you're just adventurers that just get sucked up into the mist, and now you're trapped here, what do you wish to do? I think that's also a great one. Once again, it always comes down to the kind of game that you're running. This module in particular requires a lot of buy-in because, unfortunately, horror is not done well in 5th edition. Horror is something that you should be scared of, but 5th edition characters aren't scared of anything because it's harder to die, and you got a whole bunch of cool abilities, and da-da-da, this and that. So I think horror is really hard to pull off, but if you do have that group that buys into the horror aspect of it, it's perfectly fine. Gothic horror in particular is one that's very interesting. I don't know how many people actually lean into the super gothic horror side of things. I think a lot of people just go in for the lower mid fantasy style of horror, and that's the end of the story. And that's perfectly fine. It's just a matter of what you pick up when you read that page. There's quite a lot of pages in there, and depending on the way you sort of observe it, you can definitely get a lot of things from it. You definitely can understand Strahd in a different light. Is Strahd going to constantly be attacking the party, or is Strahd only ever going to show up like 3 times in the whole campaign? It really comes down to a number of factors, really. I want to go back to all of these chapters here because, as mentioned before, this campaign, I6 Ravenloft, just started off Village of Barovia, a little Vistani camp, but they weren't called Vistani back then, and the Castle Ravenloft itself. And of course, over time, in AD&D, we got a huge expansion to the lands of Ravenloft and Barovia and all that. But here it shrunk down. So, does every single chapter add something extremely worthwhile to this campaign? Yes, but I don't think you need to use every chapter because there's some you can easily skip, and I think the campaign works perfectly fine. It really comes down to what you want to show off. So, when it comes to showing off these chapters, a big part of that is the Tarokka reading. I know that a lot of people love rigging that deck. I know a lot of people will say, oh, I definitely want my players to show up here at this part of the campaign, so I'm going to put it at the Amber Temple. And, oh, I want my players to actually go up against the werewolves, so I'm going to put one there. This and that. I know a lot of people go down that route. Me, personally, I just always do a random reading because I like to leave fate up to fate. But obviously, everyone has their own different approach to it. I think that is honestly the best way to get your players to go to a location is just to tie a Tarokka reading there. You can spend many other quests as well. You don't need a actual item to get people to go to the Amber Temple because a perfect example of that being is the whole Casimir plot line where Casimir is trying to get to the Amber Temple because he wants to resurrect his sister. And hey, your players can probably get roped in that pretty easily because Casimir says, hey, you know, there's power up there. Maybe you guys can get something too. And boom, that's going to lure a lot of people in. But some of these are a little bit of a harder sell. A perfect example being the werewolf den. If your players don't like getting into fights left and right, then saying, hey, there's a den full of werewolves. Yeah, they're probably not going to go charging in there unless there's something worthwhile, unless they get a specific quest, or if they lose somebody, or if there's something they absolutely need to get in there is there. Another one of the many plot lines that's going on the side is the Rudolf van Richten storyline, where Rudolf van Richten has come to this land to slay Strahd, but he is not in a good enough shape to do it by himself, but his trusted ward, Esmeralda, has followed suit, and the two of them are now here in these lands and doing various things and trying to help out. But the thing is I personally, when I'm running a D&D game, I like to keep all the emphasis on the players because that's what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be awesome heroes. And I hate saddling strong, and I do mean like strong characters by their side because that takes away from how awesome they are. So I definitely see that if you get Esmeralda or Rudolf van Richten earlier on, then they're going to make the party feel totally lame. And especially so if your players get Mordenkainen, but Mordenkainen doesn't actually join the party, so that's whatever. It really comes down to the final battle there. Speaking of that final battle, I see a lot of people think that the only person that's ever going to join them in that final engagement is their fated ally. That's probably, according to my interpretation, and I think a lot of people's interpretation, is not true. You can have a bunch of people show up with you for that final fight. It's just that the one fated ally is the person that's going to be able to give out inspiration, which is pretty nice. If you, are giving inspiration out and people get advantage all the time, it's pretty cool. Whatever the case may be. But you can't have a whole bunch of other people showing up. And speaking of that, during that whole final fight in Castle Ravenloft, as you're climbing around, you can actually bump into a whole bunch of Barovian commoners. They're actually not very useful at all. They're totally going to get killed in a single hit or whatever. But hey, bodies are bodies, and that's always fun. This campaign in particular is all about ramping up the tension. About the fact that you are now trapped in these lands, and you have a quest you got to do to save the day. And it's really not saving the day. It's more just getting the heck out of here. So how are you going to do it? Who are you going to have to interact with? What's going on? And things just keep on getting worse. People are dying left and right. You're going against a whole bunch of crazy monsters. And you are technically getting better over time as you level up and you get all these items. But some of those items can be stolen, and you can make more enemies than friends, and this and that. But what it always comes down to is that final conclusion, that epic fight right there at Castle Ravenloft. And as is, that can definitely be a fun time, but I think a lot of people don't do the absolute hardcore insano mode of dungeon crawling aspect exactly right, because I feel like a lot of people want to have just a one epic fight and that's the end of the story, and that's perfectly fine. But I see a lot of people also say, okay, so every 10 minutes I'm going to make a roll, and okay, we're climbing up and down all these stairs, this is going to take time, and this and that. And realistically, if your players haven't actually explored around Castle Ravenloft and they have no clue what's inside there, they will be exploring that thing for a long, long time, because there's so many rooms, and then there's so many combats, and there's so many people to talk to. And I think that unfortunately you can get a very, very strong Castle Ravenloft fatigue if you are not ready for a mega dungeon crawl. I think that one of the best things you can do for a group is probably trying to keep it as quick as possible. Or what I always suggest is have your players regularly go to Castle Ravenloft during the middle of the campaign so they get to know more and more of the layout. And then when it comes to the grand finale, then they know exactly where to go, and then they just go. For as strong as Curse of Strahd is as a book, I think what it really comes down to is the community is strong behind it. So many people are adding so many different supplements, and so many people are offering up awesome ideas, and etc., that make Curse of Strahd totally awesome. I would love to see every single one of the adventure modules get a community that's as dedicated to making all the adventures awesome, but unfortunately we don't live in that world. Curse of Strahd is great on its own, and it's only made even better by picking some individual things and following some guides and doing this and that. Curse of Strahd, it easily becomes one of the best. My personal opinion, it's not the best. I love Tomb of Annihilation myself, but I'm just a diehard fan for jungles and whatever else. So it is what it is. No matter how your campaign goes, whether your players are just always getting the crap beat out of them left, right, and center, this and that, the ending needs to be absolutely explosive. It needs to be a fun time, because if Strahd goes out in a round or two, then it's going to be boring. Make Strahd the absolute monster that he is. Make him awesome, and make that epic final fight truly memorable. And if your players are actually successful in beating Strahd, then make it just the greatest victory ever of all time, where they finally beat the monster and then they get the heck out of there. And if they so happen to pick some dark powers that make them stay in the lines of Barovia, then I guess you can leave that up for some future campaign ideas. My final thoughts on Curse of Strahd is an excellent module that is absolutely fan-friggin-tastic. Like I said before, I both played it and ran it, and now I've done 50 some odd videos on it. So much going on here. Every single one of these places, just I'm looking at this map right now, and there's just so much going on. Sadly, we get all this air quote dead space, because I feel like a lot of people never go in the woods, and people never actually climb all these hills and whatever else. But the majority of the locations actually detailed out are pretty impressive. One thing that I do for my campaigns is I expand Barovia out a little bit more. I have a bit more towns, and I like to make this place feel a little bit more populated, because once it is more populated, then you can reduce the population that much more and really sow terror and dread into your players, but it is what it is. I imagine that Curse of Strahd is going to go down as one of the best modules of 5th edition once the entirety of the 5th edition lineup is finally over and done with. But here's hoping that things are able to match its greatness or even exceed it. I, like many people, love Curse of Strahd, and I imagine if you sat through all this, that you at least have an appreciation of it too. So I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about Curse of Strahd. Do you think it is the best module around, or do you think something else beats it? Do you think that Curse of Strahd is rough around the edges, or do you think it is perfect the way it is? And do you need to add some community supplements to it, or hey, is it a perfect product on its own? Go ahead and tell me those things, because I would love to hear it. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.